So I'm fascinated by the Eagles because despite having the best record in the NFL and the third best point differential, they're treated almost like a second tier team. So throughout this video, I'm hoping to unpack them and see where they really do fall. Before we do that though, if you're interested in analytical perspectives on the NFL and NBA, please subscribe to my channel as I'll be doing weekly uploads. As for the Eagles, Jalen Hurts drives a lot of the divisiveness as his earlier years were promising but unspectacular, and this is his real breakout year where it just seems like everything's come together, and now he's playing incredibly to the point that he ranks 6th in EPA and 5th in PFF grade, in addition to looking great in the eye test. With all of that said, though, I am a bit cynical on him from the standpoint that I just don't know what he looks like in imperfect games yet. Meaning, so much of this year has been playing ahead and playing simple styles of games where you either get the ball to AJ Brown, or if he's really covered, you get it to Devonta Smith. And a lot of his rushing success could be argued to be a result of a good offensive line as opposed to his creation by himself. In saying all of that, I sort of end up in the middle with him, as I do think there's a lot to be learned from his great performance so far this year, but there is also a reasonable level of skepticism you can have based on just adequate play in his year and a quarter of NFL play so far. So, with that said, I think a B is fair for him. Moving to his playmakers, AJ Brown is just so good that I feel like we kind of forget that Devonta Smith is also really good, and they form such a nice tandem where AJ Brown is so physical and powerful, and then Devonta Smith is a little slim reaper where he is just all finesse and talent. And Quez Watkins is a solid number 3. I would say he's probably a number 4 in an ideal world, but he's not bad as a 3, and that's especially the case when Dallas Goedert is healthy, which unfortunately he is not, which does hurt them as Jack Stoll is more of a run blocker than he is a complete tight end, but it only takes them down from an A plus to an A, as I think Devonta Smith and AJ Brown form a top 5 wide receiver duo, and that covers a variety of sins. And speaking of being top 5, PFF ranks the Eagles' offensive line 3rd in run blocking and 1st in pass protection, which really speaks to just how good they are as a balanced unit, because looking at them individually, Landon Dickerson is probably their weakest offensive lineman, and he's still an above average starter. So, at a weak link position like offensive line, where you're as good as your weakest link, they're very well set up, especially because Jack Driscoll's also a good backup. So, at the risk of sounding redundant, they get an A plus for offensive line. Shifting to the other side of the trenches, the Eagles just really run the lines because their defensive line is as good as it is deep, and it's very deep. I'd say their tier 1 group of guys are Brandon Graham, who brings a lot of power, Josh Sweat, who's a mix of power and speed, and then just the all-out strength of Fletcher Cox and Javon Hargrave, which is honestly a group of guys that could compete with any defensive line in the NFL, but that's even more so the case when you factor in that's leaving out Hassan Reddick and Robert Quinn, who are complete speed demons off the edge. So after the other guys wear them down with a lot of power and some speed, they can come in against tired tackles and just run around them. And on the interior, you have Jordan Davis, who's coming back from an injury and looked great beforehand. Milton Williams, who's a solid rotational guy. And then you have some veteran depth, too, with Ndamukong Suh and Linval Joseph. So, again, if it wasn't just blatantly obvious, they get an A plus on this side of the line as well. The Eagles' linebacker core was probably the position that surprised me the most for them, as I thought Kaiser White was a great signing, and I thought he would be their lead linebacker. But as it turns out, Kaiser White is second to TJ Edwards, who is just having a phenomenal year after another great year last year as well that completely flew under my radar. I haven't heard any talk of him through any media, really. So I was a bit ignorant of it, but TJ Edwards seems like a real do it all linebacker, which you love to see. He is great in coverage and is also a good blitzer as well, which is nice to affect the passing game in multiple facets. And then he's good in the run game as well. So there's nothing you can complain about, especially because his passer rating allowed is only 68 points, which, if that were all the quarterback threw to, that would be considered a very poor game. And just to contextualize that a little bit further, Bobby Wagner is PFF's number one rated linebacker, and his passer rating allowed is an 89, which just goes to show you it's very difficult to be a linebacker in the modern NFL where offenses are tailor made to attack you. And additionally, their PFF grades for both Kaiser White and TJ Edwards are respectively both very good, as TJ Edwards ranks third and Kaiser White ranks 47th out of 81. So you have an elite linebacker in Edwards and then a solid one in Kaiser White, which helps me in rating them an A for linebacker core, which is only not an A plus because I think Kaiser White is still having a bit of a learning transition going from the Chargers system to the Eagles, but it's still a very good group that can do just about anything. For our last positional group, we have defensive backs, and they're a bit of a tale of two cities, as their cornerback group is perhaps the best in the entire NFL, as they have not one but two shutdown corners in Darius Slay and James Bradbury. And to cap it all off, they have a very solid nickel corner as well in Avonte Maddox. And then for the safeties, I'm a little bit hesitant with them, especially after Chauncey Gardner-Johnson unfortunately got hurt for the year. For me, their most interesting piece is Reed Blankenship, who in limited snaps has looked pretty promising, especially in the Green Bay game where he was messing with Aaron Rodgers a fair amount, and that was highlighted by him baiting him into an interception. But again, that's in very limited sample size, so it's hard to really say what he's going to be moving forward, especially as an undrafted rookie. Beyond him, though, I think they have established weaknesses in both Marcus Epps and Kayvon Wallace, which isn't ideal at a position where you can be attacked at your weak links, but it's mitigated a bit by the fact that they have good linebackers that can stay on the field at all times, and again, they have exceptional corners that mitigate the action they'll see deep down the field. So that, combined with the fact that PFF ranks them as the third best coverage unit, helps me to arrive to the conclusion they're an A for defensive backs. Lastly, we have their coaching, which, believe it or not, may be their most improved unit of all. And I want to start defensively and give Jonathan Gannon a ton of credit, because last year it felt to me like he was a bit over his head and was just trying to be too conservative with repeated cover 3 calls, especially against the Bucs when it just wasn't working against Brady. But this year he's blitzed far more. They went from 31st to 17th in blitz rate, and they've played man coverage a lot more because they went from Darius Slay being in man coverage 17% of the time to being in man coverage 25% of the time, which are both great moves, as it really puts pressure on the offense to have more talented receivers than the Eagles have cornerbacks, which is very hard to do. Offensively, too, it seems like they've gotten a lot of things right, and one such proof of that is in Jalen Hurts' rushing production, as in 2 less games this year than last, he's already matched exactly his rush attempts, which shows that they're buying into their strengths, where though they still do have elite wide receiver talent, they at heart are a great rushing team, but they don't get carried away with that. And that's shown by the fact that on second and longs, they're first in pass rate, which is great. You don't like to see rushes in those situations. And on first and 10, they're fourth in pass rate, which is again good because the defense is expecting a rush on first down. So they're saying, we're going to do what you don't expect, and we're going to have success with it as well. Finally, they are also very good with fourth down decisions. They've had the most conversions out of any team so far this year, which is a great sign because they've led in almost all of their games. So they're not just desperately going for it, they're going for it when it gives them a little bit of an edge. And that's when fourth down decisions are really at their most important. So they're checking a lot of boxes. And in the end, I give them an A. I would give them an A plus if there were a greater sample size, but we only really have last year and this year to go off of, so I'm a little bit hesitant to give them the full A plus. But with all of that said, this team just is exceptionally consistent across the board. They have elite talent at nearly every position, and they have depth at the positions you want to have depth at. There's not really any hole I can poke in them aside from saying I would like them to have a little bit better of a quarterback situation. But by better quarterback situation, I mean having Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen or maybe Justin Herbert. That's pretty much it. So their weakness is still a strength. And that's very telling of how good this team truly is. If you made it this far in the video, please be sure to like it and subscribe for more content.